Sure. So about 8 or 9 years ago, I kind of had a light bulb moment where I realized that, environmental determinants of health had really been neglected by the medical community. And that particular event was more related to my sister's rheumatoid arthritis. She was living with my family at the time, and she came down with an RA flare up, where her joints, her finger joints were all stiff. And she said, it'd be cool if there was a app that would tell me when the weather is going to change, because she really kind of already recognized that, like, she tended to have flare-ups when there was precipitation or barometric pressure changes or maybe humidity, various things like that. And so for me, it was kind of just this light bulb going on above my head that said, what are the environmental determinants of health? And, how do we track them, and those kinds of questions. So, I started my intellectual discovery of those particular topics. And so I ultimately, at that time, kind of came down to about 3 or 4 different areas where there were environmental, impacts, and respiratory issues, cardiovascular issues, arthritis and joint pain, and then migraines and headaches. Now, obviously, there's been a lot more evidence in the last, 5+ years, related to, pregnant women being impacted by wildfire smoke. Children and the elderly are especially vulnerable, to pollution. We're seeing even behavioral health impacts from exposure to pollution. So there's just been a growing evidence around that topic. But at the time, I decided to develop DailyBreath because I recognized an opportunity to use technology, digital health, and big data, and machine learning, and AI, those kinds of things, in trying to make it a more personalized experience. And what I mean by that is, basically, I felt that there was an opportunity to identify people's specific triggers. And part of this inspiration came from an article I read on the internet that talked about a young girl who had an asthma attack in Iowa on vacation with her family. And the article that I specifically read said, doctors trying to pinpoint triggers for a 15-year-old girl in the intensive care unit. And when I read the article, it kind of just talked about this particular girl who had been out with her family at an amusement park, and then later that evening went to the hotel pool and was exposed to chlorine and had an asthma attack. And unfortunately, she was, stopped breathing for 20 minutes and ended up, in a coma for a period of time. When she woke up, she was a paraplegic. And so her life was obviously traumatically impacted by this asthma attack. And, many of these respiratory events are potentially preventable. And so that's kind of where the inspiration for the idea around pinpointing triggers came from. And so I began the process of developing prototypes in 2017 and then 2020. And then in 2022, I ultimately went out to market with a product available in both the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And what it is a digital health that takes weather and environmental data, and that brings it into the mobile app, and then displays that information, as well as impact summaries and daily recommendations. And what that means is, like, an impact summary tells people why hot temperatures and high humidities might make pollution more threatening that day or risky that day. And then it would give a corresponding recommendation, like maybe today's a good day to wear your mask, or, pollution is going to be worse later in the day, so maybe you should take your run earlier in the day. So that's really kind of the premise behind the app.
Okay, thank you so much. So, why do you believe the air we breathe deserves more attention?
Well, because it's kind of an invisible threat. We actually the water we drink has always been that's always been something people are aware of, and we've tried to have clean water, and there's been steps to take to do that. When you think about our food, probably in the last 20 years, 30 years, we've become much more aware of what our food does to our bodies, and we've got a whole focus on nutrition. I like to sometimes think about, there's really no nutrition plan for clean air, right? So what's those steps that we take to make sure that we are, breathing clean air, or at least, what I describe it as is inhaling less of the allergens and pollutants that are in the air. But these are invisible threats. And, for the most part, our approach, has been to track these at a community level, kind of a public health approach to air pollution. And what we're really trying to do with Daily Breath is personalize that process. We want people to understand what's in the air they breathe in their immediate vicinity, because a lot of the public health models out there are really describing air quality for a regional area. And that can be an area that's as big as 3.1 miles or 5 kilometers. And that's not really personal. That's not very local. And so, really ultimately we want to make sure that people are gathering local environmental data information and then correlating that to either acute symptoms or, how they're feeling, on any given time of the day. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, Eric, thank you so much. So, for listeners who are unfamiliar with the concept, what exactly is environmental health intelligence? And how does Daily Breath help people understand their own health triggers?
Yeah, the idea is that we have a component within the app, and we're kind of expanding some features in the app that we'll have a new release in mid-August to mid-September. And what we are doing is having people record symptoms. And when they're recording the symptoms at that time, it's stamping a time of day, it's stamping a location where they are, and it's stamping the what, right? The allergens, the pollutants, and the weather conditions at the time that they experience those symptoms. And as you start to gather that data, you're able to, produce kind of reports that show what those trends and patterns are, and those patterns are personal. And so those are things that are, either prompting acute symptoms. And so you begin to suddenly understand like which particular specific triggers, are most impactful to you. And by doing that, you can get more personalized forecasting in the future. To help you plan your day or to, anticipate, problems at a particular location. There's two components really to the app in some ways. One is the actual Daily Breath forecast, which, like I said, takes this data and presents information to the user, and that information gets refined as you record your own personal symptoms. The second component is a map, and a place is another form of informing risk. So what this map does is record your symptoms on a My Symptom map, which means it's something that you can look at and you can see where your symptoms have occurred within your community. And so maybe there's a particular park where you're experiencing more symptoms, and that could be because there's a particular tree that you're allergic to at that park, or the park happens to be close to a highway corridor, and so there's more pollution there. So that's one example. That on a personal level, it helps you with risk, but also we crowdsource symptoms on a community symptom map as well. And so again, that's another thing where you're looking at, people like me who have asthma are having experiences, symptom experiences at this location. So again, it's another form of understanding risk. What's interesting about the mapping features is that you're able to do some overlays. So you can actually start to put your symptoms down and then start to begin to understand that, oh, if I, put the AQI over here, then I can see why, most of the time that I'm having symptoms, it's because, that the air quality is poor in that particular area. So there's a lot of great features when you look at AI and machine learning and geomapping features and stuff like that, that are just really powerful. For really informing about, air quality health risk. And this is not, something that's very easy. It's somewhat challenging to communicate air quality health risk to people in a way that's going to change their behaviors or, suggest that they, implement upstream interventions and stuff like that. But we hope with Daily Breath, people, can become more environmentally aware, become more intelligent about what the personal health impacts are to them, and then take action really to prevent those bad health outcomes.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So, yeah, you talk about making health something very personal. Can you share with us why it is important for people to understand their individual reactions to environmental exposures?
Sure. I think that the challenge with our current the way we currently report air quality is we have various layers, good, moderate, unhealthy for sensitive groups. And sensitive groups tend to be children, elderly, and people with specific conditions like asthma and COPD. And then you have generally unhealthy for all people. Then you have very unhealthy. And then you have hazardous. Okay. And those are all readings that are basically saying for air quality at this level, it's going to be problematic for that group of people, right? Those groups of people. And so that's somewhat challenging in the sense that, two things, that air quality index is not just, air quality index is really a amalgamation of various pollutant risks, whether it's ozone or PM 2.5 or nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide. It's kind of a combination of all of those risks where you're getting that variable. And then the second thing is, again, that's really it's only describing what the risk of the exposure is. It's not really combining two things, right? Everyone has a personal sensitivity to a threshold for them where they're impacted. And that's based on their own physiology. They have an individual susceptibility to feeling symptoms based on how sensitive they are to particular pollutants. And so we want to, with Daily Breath, we want to accurately identify potentially what are the specific pollutants and the specific allergens that are impactful for your health, right? If you look at allergens, people think of pollen as trees, grasses, or weeds. And that's because, trees usually, people who have a tree allergy usually have those allergies in the spring. If they have allergies in the summer, those tend to be grass allergies. If they have allergies in the fall, those tend to be ragweed or weeds. And so that's kind of their only association with, from a specific perspective of it happens to be a tree. But ironically, there are actually different types of trees, right? So you may be allergic to a pine tree, but, not to an oak tree, right? So ultimately, if you were really trying to understand your personal health and how specific pollens impact your allergies, you would want to know that, oak trees are present near you, or those are, things that are causing your symptoms. And same thing with the pollutants is we can determine over time with Daily Breath that, maybe you're experiencing most of your symptoms, near a traffic corridor. And that means probably most likely you're very sensitive to traffic pollution, which is nitrogen dioxide. So that's kind of an example. There's other examples. You may be close to an industrial plant that actually one of the pollutants that comes from that industrial plant is sulfur dioxide. And so if you're experiencing symptoms close to that industrial plant, it could be because you have a higher sensitivity to that particular pollutant. So that's an example of what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So, what advice would you give to someone who wants to start paying closer attention to how their environment affects their health?
Well, like I certainly would encourage your listeners to download Daily Breath. Again, I think the important thing to recognize is most air quality apps are just recording the severity of the exposure, the pollution. And what we're really trying to do with Daily Breath is connect that exposure with your health experience, and almost build a personal environmental health record for you that documents how you experience exposures throughout your day and how they impact your health. So I certainly encourage people to download Daily Breath from the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, depending on whether they have an iPhone or a Google smartphone. I think that, just being aware that the weather has some impacts on, pollution, and understanding, on what types of days you're going to feel more sensitivity to pollution. Pollution is, significantly impacted by like hot temperatures and high humidity. So it's important to understand kind of everything about like those conditions, weather conditions, environmental conditions, and then actually, recording your own personal symptoms and how you feel. One of the features in the app that we're adding is a daily breath check-in that asks the user, how is your breathing today compared to yesterday? And you have the options of saying better, same, or worse. And if you say worse, it actually calculates in the back end, ozone is 25% worse today than yesterday. And what that really does for people is it gives people context. It gives them, information. Actually, it actually gives them knowledge about how they're experiencing the environment, right? And that's important because, data and information without knowledge and wisdom doesn't really drive action. And so that's what's really powerful about Daily Breath.
Right. Thank you so much, Eric. Eric, thank you for sharing this particular issue about our daily breath. So, for listeners who want to learn more about daily breath and start understanding how the air around them may be affecting their health, where can they connect with you?
Sure. Well, my primary website is www.dailybreath.com. And there's links to download the Daily Breath app there. The app is also available in the two stores that I mentioned. The app is actually called Daily Breath - the air you breathe, with you as a U. And then my email address is Eric, ERIC, @dailybreath.com. And I do encourage, people to inquire, about, provide questions to me. And I'm happy to share more and more information with folks. And, I want people to join me in kind of a journey to, discover, how to communicate, effectively air quality health risk to everyone, so that everyone can breathe easier, one symptom at a time.
All right. So before we let you go, Eric, what is one simple change people can make today to become more aware of their environment and take better control of their health?
Yeah, the one thing I would do is, again, download Daily Breath. Be aware of other air quality, apps that have air quality information out there. But just be, cognizant of the air you breathe, that,